Hello and welcome once again. It's nice to have you join me on the In Your PODcket video podcast. Feminism has gotten a bad rap over the years, but I think it's slowly becoming better understood, thanks to the advent of International Women's Day, as well as the efforts of people like Jess Khouri, who's my guest today. We talk about how the notion of feminism that she herself teaches is one that's merely a guiding set of ideals that everyone aspires to experience, which is fairness and compassion. Hear how and why modern businesses are shifting to becoming more personified and showcasing the identities of the people behind the brands. Understand how she perceives society's progress as we inch towards common ground, as well as how she approaches raising a child in a society that's often riddled with conflict and uncertainty. With that, I hope you enjoyed the fourth episode with my guest, Jess Khouri. So I'm joined today by Jessica Khouri. She's previously an NCAA turned CIS student athlete, relocating from one of my personal favorite cities in the United States, the windy city of Chicago, to a city known for its street meat and a university with the unofficial tag as the Ivy of the North. She's a former Varsity Blue, current marketer, professor, best-selling author, wife, and mother. It's so nice to have you on the podcast, Jess Khouri.
Every time someone introduces me on a podcast or an interview, it gets better and better. And I feel like really good about myself. So that was really, really great. Thank you so much for having me today.
Absolutely. So getting right into it, I am not somebody who is short on beliefs. And one of them is that the projects that we pursue originate, I think, from our own life experiences. So, as an author, I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit. Can you let those listening become familiar with your story, similar to how they might familiarize themselves with a book by reading the back of its cover?
Sure. So I grew up in a very small town east of Toronto. We're famous for one road and an apple orchard and a mill. And as you know, Tim, I'm sure this will come out, but Tim and I are also high school pals. And so we went to school in what would be considered, quite a suburban area, not quite touched by the city sprawl of Toronto like it is today. And I grew up that sort of this quintessential small town life. But as I was, learning and growing and things like that, I was very aware of, little quips and things like that, or that were very, to me, I didn't understand the terms at the time, but quite sexist. Certainly the recent stories around the NCAA women's basketball team reminded me of my experiences as a young female athlete of not getting the good gym for practice time as a kid and getting hand-me-down uniforms, asking for big, strong boys to carry the chairs. And, out of spite, I would be like, I'm going to carry 10, which was my sort of early forms of activism. So I became quite aware of sexism that girls and women faced at a young age. And I became quite interested in it because it didn't sit right with me. And then in high school, I was very fortunate to be introduced to the concept of feminism by our world geography teacher. I'm going to shout out to Ms. Kirkland if you're listening. And I was fortunate to be introduced to, something that just totally blew my mind. So I was introduced to feminism at a young age, and that allowed me to understand my experiences in a way that drove me to pursue the work that I'm doing today. And certainly I've been a lot of places. My academics have taken me to Chicago, Toronto. I did my graduate degree in Newfoundland. And so I've been able to study with and live these experiences in a way that have informed the books that I write, the work that I do, and the messages that I want to convey.
Wow. Said only as how someone who's pretty good with words actually could, and not definitely someone like me. On that topic, I don't think I don't think that I'm unlike a lot of people who developed a flawed notion as to what feminism or feministic values are. I think largely because of Hollywood, but I might be like a lot of people who have misconception as to what it actually entails.
Sure. So
Personally, I loved the 90s movie 10 Things I Hate About You growing up, and I still watch it from time to time, but it gave such a crude and inaccurate representation, in my opinion, of a subject which you've devoted your working life to. So, is it fair to say that the average person has developed a misconception as to who feminism actually impacts?
I really believe that. I think feminism has been in our current culture today because of pop culture, because of past movements, and because of some radicalized versions. I think feminism today is understood as very much stereotypically man hating, quote unquote bra burning, um, angry women, and at its very core, at its sort of very basic goal is just equality and rights for women. It's pretty like, it's pretty baseline when you think of general feminism in that way. That's why so many women actually, you would think, do you believe in equality for women? A lot of women would be like, duh. But so many women don't want to associate themselves with the label because of those negative stereotypes. It's why a lot of people will say, I'm not a feminist, but I believe in this, I believe in that. I believe in literally everything feminism stands for without naming it. So it does have this kind of negative light shone on it. What I'm excited for, and what a lot of my work is actually introducing people to what feminism really is, right? And so I operate from an intersectional feminist framework. I don't believe that there's any feminism that shouldn't be intersectional. And what I mean by that, intersectionality is a term that was coined by Kimberly Crenshaw, and it means that we, as people, experience privilege and oppression on different levels depending on our lived experience. So when I talk about the wage gap and I say, white women make 77 cents for every dollar, well, that 77 cents is significantly less for Black women and Indigenous women. It's the same way that we can see racialized violence increased from a gendered perspective versus violence against white women. And it's really how we understand feminism as gender equality, but that gender equality can't be the only thing that we're looking at. So that's the work that I do. And I believe that a lot of people, regardless of your gender identity, operate from this way when we're looking to make change.
Okay, so if I were to boil that down and kind of reduce it to a version that I would explain to somebody as if they were 5 years old, the concept of feminism to you and the teachings that you kind of profess and you empower others to live in, it's really just having a rudimentary kind of reciprocation of equality and how someone would like to be treated, right? Not so much kind of,
Essentially,
hey, look at me.
yeah,
Yeah.
it looks at equality and breaking down systems of power for everyone, and feminism in particular looks at that through a gendered lens. So equality, change, rights.
Right. Personally, I kind of revert back to a time that I can remember, an interaction that you and I had back in your Varsity Blue days. So, one of the first times I remember hearing from you of your interest in feminism in particular, possibly brought on by a particular, beauty campaign by a brand. I don't really want to mention it here, but I think we both know what we're talking about. The more life experience that we attain, the better we can pursue our passions in the areas of our own interest. So, how has your passion for empowering other women since those Varsity Blues days evolved, basically as your time spent as an undergrad?
I've certainly, oh gosh, first of all, my time spent as an undergrad, I like to think of as 2 years ago, but it certainly was not. And it's evolved in a number of other ways. I think that I've seen, from my Varsity Blues days, I went on to do my graduate degree, and I had, aspirations and goals to be an academic feminist and to teach within the academy. And after I completed my graduate degree, I actually really didn't want to do that. I wanted to sort of get outside the walls of the academy, look at the research and the feminist theory that I had learned, which was quite inaccessible to most people. You know, I had a lot of privilege to be educated at that level. And I wanted to find ways to make it accessible to all. And so it changed, because at first I thought I was going to be shaping the next generation of minds, when in reality, what I'm doing is bringing feminism into non-traditional spheres where you wouldn't, typically see it, like the business world, to give people the tools and the lens to make the change in a number of ways, not just from the sort of academic activist standpoint.
Yeah, and I can certainly appreciate that. And I'm curious to see, I guess, or to hear your thoughts on this, but it's almost as if you talk about the intersectionality of, I guess, in feminism in and of itself, but I think that this is being personified here as you identifying your kind of entrepreneurial drive at kind of a rudimentary or grassroots sense, so that you do realize that you can impact or have a larger impact outside of the walls of institution. So I'm just curious to know, like, if you could maybe expand upon a little bit more about that. So how would you, other than just simply access, does the tone of the message, or actually like the substance like that's fueling that message, change from the conversations that you have within the walls of, post-secondary, uh, to that of maybe a conversation that you might have on the streets with somebody who, you're not quite as familiar with?
Yeah, I think that I mean, there's a huge shift in how you're expected to speak within the academy, versus like this very accessible conversational tone. I felt a lot of pressure in grad school and even in undergrad. I mean, U of T was a very good women's studies program, and there was a lot of very brilliant women and a lot of very brilliant persons there who were um, revolutionary thinkers. They were so great and so great to learn from, but I felt a lot of pressure and a lot of anxiety to perform at that level. And it wasn't that I didn't understand the content or the theory, it was that that's not how I talk about things. And so when I was able to, I don't want to say escape, but decide to leave and pursue other goals, um, I really was cognizant of how I was speaking about concepts. And I really thought, okay, I want to make feminism accessible to people. What does that mean? That means accessibility from a language standpoint. So talking to people in conversational tones, talking to people in with common terms, with like things that people are cool with, not something they're going to be like totally understand and then Google dictionary later. um with making things financially accessible. So I do a lot of conversations and a lot of talks and workshops and stuff for free, but of course I've built a business as well around making feminism part of your work. And so I make sure that a lot of the programs that I offer are financially accessible, because again, I think class privilege is a really big thing that we have to talk about when we talk about education. um and yeah, just making things, talking about things in a way that are relatable to my experiences. So when I say, my research was on, we talked about the advert, you brought up the advertising campaign, so I talk about body image a lot. That was my graduate research, body image and community building. And I'll tell them when they're like, oh, I don't know if that's a thing, and I'll say, like, I can't actually buy clothes in most of the stores downtown. And so when you make things not personal, but when you give people examples, when they can see that people that they trust and respect and listen to can give these really concrete examples, or make them see the examples in their own experiences, I think that's a really great way to start planting those seeds in people's minds.
Yeah, you're touching on something that I definitely want to address a little bit later on here. So I would like to maybe press the pause button on this point of the conversation and kind of like maybe take a little step back here. On your website, which I was cruising around on, you mentioned that entrepreneurism is a tool for social change. That statement in particular, I think resonates with me in what I'm trying to accomplish in catalyzing probably what I would consider a journey for others in their own self-discovery.
Mhm.
So, with your statement in mind, what would need to happen in your career in order to say that you got the most out of your entrepreneurial tool or platform, if you will?
Mhm. I think so. I always talk about it as a three-step process, and the first step is always to educate yourself. So if you want, the business that you're building or your entire entrepreneurial journey, um, to bring about the change you want to see, the first thing you have to ask is like, what is the change I want to see? And so a lot of that comes from doing the work, reading work and articles that are written, by communities who experience oppression, doing the work to realize, what is my own experience in society. So really educating yourself and really coming up with, I call it a feminist agenda, but for anybody is coming up with a values list that you live your life by. And then with each point on that, you look at how can a piece of my business or my entrepreneurial journey help accomplish that. And I always tell people that language is powerful, and that's a really great and accessible way to start. And what I mean by that, for example, one of the most basic things that I teach people is not to use gendered language, and that's for a number of reasons. Number one being you don't know how anybody identifies, and number two being a lot of times when we say things, like "Hey guys," "fireman," we revert to man as the dominant form. And so I always say do a language audit of what you're saying, what you're writing, see what you can swap out. That's a starting point for me. But it really comes at what are my values and how can my business help achieve those.
You are the creator of the Feminist Entrepreneurship Academy,
Yes,
which is a means for you to show people how to build feminism into your work. Is that correct?
it is. Yeah, it's not just for entrepreneurs. I actually get quite a bit of signups from people who work in the corporate world or just people who are interested in learning more about feminism. So essentially, it's structured like a course where you get lessons, and it always starts with here's the educational piece that you need to learn about this particular topic, and then here's the activities that you need to do in your own business, and then here's the tools for you to do them. So we had a week on language, for example, and what we did was the lesson was about why is language important. Here are some reasons why these particular kinds of languages are bad, and I look at a three-way audit. So gendered language, um, culturally appropriative language, and oppressive language. And so I give some examples and kind of a checklist for people to go through their work. So the Entrepreneurship Academy runs monthly, and it's really for anyone who's interested in learning what is feminism and then how to bring some particular tools into their business to change it. And then my next step up is one-on-one work with clients, where I work one-on-one with people to help them write their feminist agenda. Right, feminist agendas has a very negative connotation in society as well, just like feminist. People are always like, I don't like your feminist agenda, and that's been my whole life. And so now I'm helping people take the power back, write their own agendas, which essentially, Tim, is just their values list, and how they can then carry out those values in their business.
Okay, so I think you probably answered my next question then. So I don't want this to sound standoffish at all, right? And I don't want to be a victim of my own question here. But you mentioned that feminism just in general is essentially like creating a more inviting or equal workspace, for example. But is there kind of a general reason as to why people are including the integration or sorry, integrating a feminist agenda into their own business plans?
I think in this past year in particular, people have become much more aware um, of the concepts of anti-oppression, inclusion, the buzzword of diversity. Will you? But I think certainly the Black Lives Matter protests, um, and went very mainstream and viral on social media. And I think social media in particular plays an important role to the awareness that people are starting to get. And I've seen, and I don't know if this is just I started following more of the right people, or if the people that I was following are starting to get more active. I've seen quite an increase of educational content, as well as like social and political activism and human rights stuff happening on social media. So I think our exposure to it has increased greatly this past year. And so I think because of that, people want to do more. There's always going to be, the social media activists and the slacktivists who reshare, and that's it. But I think for a lot of people, bringing social change into their business is a tangible way that they can help work towards equality, work towards fighting back against anti-oppression. It's a form of how they're helping advance these kinds of movements. And I don't want to say like corporate's not genuine in their efforts, but I think there's a big rush from a corporate and PR perspective to appear to be caring. And so my hope is that when corporations hire people to come in, that it's A, people with those lived experiences, and B, people who have experience with that type of education, and that once they're in there, whether the intent was genuine or not, that it actually brings about the kinds of change that we're hoping to see. So I think it really just boils down to, we are more aware, we are more exposed to it, and the people that I'm working with in particular are starting to understand that the work that they were already doing is actually feminist. And I believe that I'm helping to sort of break down the stereotypes and help people embrace that.
Okay. Now, focusing on maybe just the corporate subsection of this. Off air, we talked about the saying, or the words of wisdom that you kind of are guided by, which is your feminist agenda is your why and your business is your how. This is interesting to me because I subscribe heavily to the experience economy, which intersects uniquely with, I think, feminism in this, right? So, in that, I think it communicates an authentic theme
Mm-hmm.
from a business standpoint. The experiences a business provides is, I think, only as special or endearing as to those experiencing, as to whoever the person experiencing them perceives them to be. So in the corporate setting, there's more and more change that's being made from, I would say, the top down, like you had mentioned, well, I guess maybe alluded to, as a result of an audience or whoever their audience is voicing what matters to them. So what does a change or greater presence of women in the C-suite mean to Jess Khouri, champion for social change in the professional sense?
I think from like a representation standpoint, it's everything. I think it's important that the businesses that we're buying from, that the businesses that we're working for, that the businesses that we support is a real reflection of our society as a whole. And I think right now, I don't know the statistics because I'm sure you remember this, but I'm particularly bad with numbers. And I don't remember the statistics, but the number of women in executive positions, the number of women in leadership roles within that corporate sector is quite low in comparison. And so I think it's important that more women who share those feminist values are in those leadership roles, because when you're in those executive and leadership roles, then you can start to make the change within the company and the ways in which the company interacts with the community at large. And that's how change is made, when people in leadership positions have those beliefs and are able to have the power to do something about it.
I agree with this. All right, so I'm going to take you off the coals here and I think talk about something that I think is pretty cool. Like, you are a best-selling author with another one, I'm sure, in the making here. Can you talk a little bit about the one that's currently in the works and I think it's scheduled to hit the shelves in the fall, is that right?
It is. I mean, COVID always
Yeah.
plays around with some dates, but the fall is our goal. The book is just to give you a little bit of a background to how the book came to be. I'm a very active member of the women in business community, both here in my local area as well as the Ottawa and Oshawa, everywhere. I believe that more women in entrepreneurship is an empowering thing, but and the more that I participated in networking events, the more that I sort of really ate up this, girl boss babe rhetoric that was out there, the more I started to really question what are the narratives that this community is actually perpetuating, and is it good for women? And so I started to critically look at things like who's represented and who's left out of the narratives. What are these kind of icky sales tactics that are happening? And I started to look at it critically, and what it really came down to was, boss babe, or the boss babe community. And I'm not here to argue whether you should or shouldn't use the term, but the boss babe community as a whole is actually co-opting feminism, but in a way that isn't feminist. And so the book is really about that. It really breaks down some of the key, pillars that the community has, and the narratives that it perpetuates. And it looks at the different ways that we can use feminism to build more inclusive and collaborative communities. And so my biggest point on that is that just because you're a woman in business doesn't mean that you're a feminist. Just because a business is led by a woman doesn't mean it's a feminist if they're still perpetuating those same sort of toxic systems of power that kind of leave all other women behind. And so that's what the book is about. It's my own experience. It's Kylie, the co-author and the head of the publishing company's experience. It draws from some interviews on other women from the community. And so I think it's a nice mix of storytelling and research, as well as some really practical tools that people can use to make some change in what they're doing.
Okay. Now, going from, I guess, the progress here, just in a chronological sense, from grad school to, you, and I guess, entering the workforce, to then authoring your first book, to authoring your second book, how has your process changed, or I guess, how has the process compared to the first time when you basically put, ink to paper in air quotes, right?
I think it's changed a lot. I mean, my first like real experience with writing was grad school, and it was my thesis. And it's funny, like millennials don't fit any like stereotypical like writing terms anymore, because we're just typing on our MacBooks.
Yeah.
And when I put fingers to keys, it's and that for me was like a long process, because it was so heavy and so academic, and I was like so over it. So when I had submitted my chapter idea for our first book, Women Let's Rise, which was co-authored by 20 women, it was a really beautiful sort of example of collaboration to create something for women. I educated myself, as well as I really embraced the help of the publisher. She was really great at sort of showing us how you build out your chapter. And the number one way that you build out a chapter is to think, what do you want readers to get out of this? So what is your intent behind it? And from there, you're able to formulate your words. And my chapter, Girl Gang, was really easy for me to write, because it was so personal, and it was so it was happening as I was writing it. And it was really about, okay, I'm feeling really shitty in these communities. What do I wish they looked like? Or what do I wish people were acting? So it was really easy. Now, of course, that was one chapter versus a whole book. So this time it's a little, and I wrote it, I don't even remember. Did I write it during quarantine? I don't know. I actually think that I think I had the writing complete before we went into lockdown. And so this time it's a little bit different, because I'm sure, as you can attest to, and a number of people can attest to, like productivity and is just not the same. And I used to find comfort in my late night writing, but now I just like find comfort in like having a good night's sleep. So so it's a little bit of it's a little bit of a different process this time in terms of really carving out real writing time instead of just like I'm in the mood to write. But it's exciting because it's weird to just be like people want to hear your ideas. I can't believe people want to read what I have to say.
Yeah, it's flattering. It's flattering. And it's also kind of interesting to see how, I guess, things change behind the scenes. So, life changes and well, life happens. So, my I'm curious to know, Jess Curry is the feminist, but most importantly as a mother as well, in your case to a son, who are you helping him to become?
Sure. I believe that my feminism and my, being a mom are actually hand in hand. They're equally as important because, I want him to know that feminism is for everybody and that it's really important to fight for the change that you want to see and to be part of the change that you want to see. I feel like that's that's on a motivational poster at Curtis Secondary or something for sure. Be the change you want to see. But like as cliche as that sounds, is like we all play an important role, it's I want to introduce him to those concepts of social change at a young age, and certainly feminism has informed the ways in which that I do that.
So, if I could maybe put the weight of the world on your shoulders here, because I don't know if, well, I don't really know if a lot of people really think about life this way. But when your son gets to the age where he is ready to really understand, or he's able to understand the message that you want to tell him, what is going to be that message, or what might be that message that you tell him when he's ready to hear it?
Sure. I think it's some iteration of feminism is for everybody, and it's not to paint a bright and cheery picture of the world. I think sometimes we want to shelter our kids from everything, right? We want them to only see good and to only see positive, and I think it's really important to age appropriately, expose them to some of the things that are happening because for a lot of people I meet, a lot of my fellow feminists in the business community, like they're just coming to these concepts. I always tell people that it was a privilege for me to have a teacher like Ms. Kirkland who was a feminist and who introduced that concept. And that was grade 12, Tim. That wasn't like, talking about women's rights, in grade 5 history class or something. And so I think if like the systems aren't changing, that we as parents have to be the ones to bring that education to our kids, because certainly there's a lot of stuff that we didn't learn in elementary and high school that certainly we should have. And that's why people always talk about kids go off to university and they get radicalized. Well, it's because they can take a bunch of different courses, right? They're not being sheltered by like this sort of mainstream curriculum. Not that I'm saying, the academy is whatever, but I think that, you're exposed to so many different kinds of people and clubs and stuff in post-secondary that, I don't think that they should have to wait to learn that.
That's fair.
Yeah.
That's fair. I think that's really real, and it, more than it just being applicable to, I guess, your son, this is just general life stuff. And I think that the landscape is becoming a little bit more dynamic, or maybe that's just the internal optimist within myself. But regardless, I that's wonderful. To wrap up here, at least from my end, this might have been a lot to take in for some people. Those people might, replay this to hear what it is you have to say, maybe with a different ear.
Mhm.
But for those who are interested, what resource might you suggest for them to really get their feet wet with the notion of better exploring feministic values?
I think, I mean, there's a lot of like, people who, are sort of trailblazers in feminism. Gloria Steinem is a big name, Kimberly Crenshaw, Bell Hooks. But I think if you're really interested, there's tons of people on social media, right? I actually think like if you're looking for digestible stuff, if you're looking for stuff that's an introduction, and you're not looking to like sign up for women's studies 101. I think that you can look to activists who are doing this work, like real grassroots activists. I actually really think the Canadian Women's Foundation is a great resource, and they often provide not just definitions,
Mhm.
but sort of their own research and backed up studies. They have some excellent stuff on the gendered implications of the pandemic. So cruise around Instagram, check out the Canadian Women's Foundation, um, and follow me. I love giving out free stuff.
I was just gonna say you're forgetting to mention your own self. I mean, of course, I think you're maybe a little bit too humble to do that, so I'll do it
I
for
am,
you.
I
Go
am,
ahead and
I am
yeah,
no, and that's another gendered thing, right? Women actually don't like to brag about their accomplishments, but I'm really good, so follow me.
I love it. I love it. Okay, so before we wrap this up here, is there anything else that you'd like to impart on somebody who's listening?
Uh, no, I mean, I just want to thank you for having me on. I'm so thrilled and honored. I love collaborating from with friends from childhood. And two, I just want people to know that like it is a long road, and it's a never ending road of educating yourself when it comes to social issues and social change. And it's uncomfortable to unlearn things and relearn them, and it's uncomfortable to realize that we're all complicit in certain systems of power and we benefit from them. So I just
Mhm.
want you to don't get discouraged. Self-care is important when it comes to like fighting for social change, and just continue educating yourself.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for joining me today, Jess, and I look forward to kind of sharing this message with everybody who's really like willing to learn about how the world around them is changing.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Tim.
This interview has been brought to you by Choice Asset Groups, a boutique subscription-based financial planning and asset-agnostic management firm built to help high net worth and entrepreneurs build the gap between their money and its meaning. Choice provides an interactive virtual client experience for those seeking world-class financial expertise and sensible advisory fees. To learn more, visit www.choicegroups.ca to book a meeting and begin your journey today.
I'm glad you've made your way to the end. Listening to Jess's much more charismatic tone and the way in which she views feminism, as well as how she approaches integrating it into her clients' lives, is the reason why I think that this topic has been so misunderstood. I include myself in the grouping of people who have had a flawed understanding of what it entails prior to my interest in her professional journey, our friendship aside. This framework should serve as a basis that I guess other considerations are being made in the minds of consumers today as they understand that their behaviors do influence the actions of corporations that cared only about satisfying the short term considerations of their bottom lines. I hope that you'll join me next time as I continue my journey talking about the things that matter. I love to know where in the world you're watching this, so let me know in the comments section below. I'd love to connect. With that, cheers and see you next time.